Roxo Media House.
Welcome back into another exciting episode of Dissecting the Frogs, presented by PlayActionPools.com. It's a bye week, so Jamie and Maggie are going to take this one off, but we have a great guest waiting for you. So let's dive into this one.
The surge in his head, former head coach David Beaudin brings his football expertise to frog fans everywhere in Dissecting the Frogs.
Dave's Hot Chicken is a cult favorite and now has 2 locations in Fort Worth, Bryant Irvin Road on I-20 and Berry Street at TCU, both owned and operated by Horned Frogs. Mention the Frogs Today show and get 10% off anytime and order online at daveshotchicken.com.
PlayActionPools.com. The newest sports pool hosting platform, Play Action Pools is your spot for all of your football contest needs. Whether it's a pick'em or survivor pool, Play Action has you covered against or without the spread. Be sure to check out PlayActionPools.com and use code FROGS today for 15% off your league.
Welcome back into Dissecting the Frogs. I'm David Beaudin. I'm here with Jeff Jordan, the only returning guest on Dissecting the Frogs. Coach, I know you have, you've been the winningest coach at Garland. You've worked for the Cowboys. You're obviously working elite college football programs, but this has to be the pinnacle of your career.
It is way up there. It's either that or you guys are really getting desperate for people to get on. So
no, that's not it at all. I know the first time we got a chance to talk during camp, we really dove into your role as the director of player personnel, right? Assistant AD, director of player personnel, and what that entails and roster management. It was really fascinating. This one I want to jump right into sort of your second job, right, which is a big one, with TCU, and that is sort of overseeing analytics for the game. I know you guys are big proponents of that, and Coach Dykes and you work closely together. So when I look at it, I know how deep this stuff can go, right? How wide do you go? Meaning, you've got all these situations, the easy ones, when to go for 2, when to go for 4th down, but you start thinking about, when to intentionally take a safety or, let an offense score and, just give up for time purposes. Right. Does the analytics do you guys cover all that stuff as well? Or do you kind of stay more of a narrow focus?
No, it does. It covers every situation, you could ever think of. This is my 36th year in football. And, that's one of the great things about it. You're always learning something new. And, it covers everything from if you've got 2 timeouts left, and do you need the onside kick, or do you need to, or can you kick it deep if you've got 3, and how much time you need to have left? It covers the whole lock, stock, and barrel.
Wow, that's interesting. Is it also impact? Do you ever go as deep as, or as wide, I should say, as personnel decisions? So I'll give an example. So there's a punter, and a coach may look at it and say, well, his average, is much better than, and I'm just being very generic here, not necessarily specific to TCU in this case, but you got 2 punters, his average is higher, so conventional wisdom say this is the guy that should be our punter. But when you start looking at some of the analytics and standard deviations and all that stuff, this guy may be more consistent. Does it get into personnel decisions at all? Who starts and that kind of thing?
It does a little bit. We actually use there are a couple of services that we use that also get into some of that stuff, and there are more personnel. These guys, Championship Analytics is more strictly game management, game situation, game management stuff.
Got it. Makes sense. And how much, I know it's hard to quantify this part of it, but how much does, or what scenarios, are there any scenarios where just gut trumps analytics? Like, are there any specific that shows up more often?
As far as situations, really a lot of it, the 4th down part of it, and really that gets into more of the flow of the game, because sometimes, and they base their stuff on pregame analysis, and if say they expected it to be a real high scoring game, if it's expected to be a real high scoring game, it's a very aggressive book. If it's expected to be a low-scoring game, it's a little bit more. But, you've done this for a long time. A lot of times you'll go into a game thinking, oh, God, we're going to have to win this in 52-48. And you look up midway through the third quarter, it's 7-3. Right. And so you've got to change a little bit, and get into the flow of the game. But that's really where the gut part of it comes in.
Yeah, and it's a slippery slope. I heard you talk. I know you talked briefly with Brian Estridge in Frogs Today last week, and I wanted to get a chance to get in there and dive a little bit deeper into this stuff. But he talked about the Colorado game, and really on the other side, the field, Colorado goes for it on 4th down, and then all of a sudden, they don't get it. So now it's a slippery slope. You don't trust the data, and then you don't go for it the second time, right? And so I always wondered how much can your gut say, okay, this is just what I feel, as opposed to what the data, because you can go down that road and get yourself in trouble.
100%. You really can, and you can't get scared off because it doesn't work. 'Cause it's not going to work 100% of the time. I mean, we know that, and everybody knows that. But we also know if we stick to the numbers, stick to the stats, it's eventually going to play out in our favor.
Are there any scenarios or game situations where it is analytics, virtually 100% of the time? Is there something you say, a certain situation where you say we're always going to go to what the data tells us?
The go for two chart's the easiest one with that. I mean, and even within that, there's some gray areas, and they put in the book, this is a neutral. You can make a case for going for two and not. And as you go through in the book, there'll be some occasions where it's a recommended. It'll say it's definite go at 4th and 4, recommended go at 4th and 5, recommended punt at 4th and 6. Definite punt at 4th and 7. And so you've got a little bit of a gray area where you've got to make a decision on what you want to do.
Okay. And I want to follow up on two of those things you just thought. Obviously, probably two of the biggest ones when it comes to analytics is going for two and 4th down, right? Whether to go for it on offense or not. The go for two, is it a lot deeper than I may know? When I know everyone has that, every coach has that standard 2-point chart. Is there a lot more to it, or is that kind of for that category, is it pretty much that chart more or less?
It's pretty much that chart. A big part of that is just deciding when you want to implement it. Personally, and I know and Coach Dykes and I are both of the same philosophy, that you really don't start using the chart until midway through the third quarter on in the fourth quarter, because it's too early. Otherwise, you don't know how the game's going to flow out. And it seems like when you go for two early and you miss it because the chart says, then you're chasing that point the rest of the night.
Yeah, you talked about with Brian last week about just chasing points and getting yourself in that situation. And one of the more popular ones that come up, especially over the last few years when it comes to going for two. So it's that it is the second half, so it's later in the game. You just scored a touchdown, but you're down by 15, right? And people in the stands, when people first started going for two in that situation, everyone's kind of looking at what is going on, but. Am I correct in saying that the data does say, because I know 2-point conversions, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the average is 50%, right? 50%. And so if you don't get it that first time, odds tell you that you'll get it on the second one, and then that you can at least have a chance to play for overtime. Is that something, that argument kind of put to bed where analytics sort of trumps that and says, down by 15, you should go for two at that point?
It never puts it to bed completely, because you got to talk about it, and we've gone through those. We actually, when we were playing Memphis in 2019, we scored to get down 15 late in the game, and it was one of those deals where we felt like we were fortunate to still be in the game because they were probably a little bit better than we were. We had talked about it before that drive. Okay, hey, if we score, do we want to go for two right here and see if we could sneak one out that maybe we really shouldn't win? And we scored and we're down 15. Logic says you kick the extra point, make it 14, make it a 2-touchdown game. We had decided beforehand that if we scored, we were going to go for two. We go for two and we make it. And all of a sudden, and actually, I'm sorry, we were down 14 when this started, and we had scored. We went from 8 to 6 instead of making it a 7-point game. But it gave us a chance if we recovered an onside kick. Now we've got a chance to score and win the game. Right. And you could just kind of feel the complexion when we made it for two, and instead of it being a 7-point game, now it was a 6-point game, and you could see their sideline, the tension. It was pretty cool to watch. But that one is a real gut call on whether you want to do that and go ahead and do that on that occasion. And we did on that occasion. It worked out.
Yeah. So you mentioned something there in terms of that feeling and that confidence, and I think that's one thing that you can't kind of put a tag on. And so how important is that to sort of sell this stuff to your players beforehand? Meaning, like, you're practicing it, you're watching it on film, these different situations. Not only are you teaching those guys the in-game situations, but you're also saying, hey, look, we may do something and it may not work out, but this is the right call, and them knowing that ahead of time.
Yeah, exactly. And we do. We talk to our guys about that, and Coach Dykes gets up early in camp, telling them we're going to be real aggressive on going for it on fourth downs. We're going to be real aggressive on going for this stuff, and here's why. And then we'll show them stuff on Friday night before the game. Just going through different situations that have happened in college football and different things they've done. Okay, here's what they're doing. Here's what we do in that situation, just so the guys understand it. And you know how it is with the team. As long as they feel like there's a plan, it's thought out, it's planned out, they've got confidence in it, and they feel good about it.
Right. Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And I look at, you also mentioned something about being the better team or they're the better team.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that's taken into account in analytics themselves, or something that you have to factor in additionally? Because I know it's important, right?
That is a huge part of how they set up the book. The two big things that determine whether it's going to be a really aggressive book or a little bit more conservative book are if you're favored or not, and if it's expected to be a high-scoring game or not. So if you're an underdog and it's expected to be a really high-scoring game, it's going to be a really aggressive book. And by aggressive, it means, in a normal situation, it might say 4th and 2 or better, go for it. That week, it may be 4th and 5 or better, go for it. But if you're a favorite and it's expected to be a low-scoring game, it'll be a very conservative book.
How do you then personally take into account, things that sort of out of your control as the game progresses? So severe weather, some injuries. I was walking, your alma mater. I was on a plane yesterday, so I trying to get it in and out. The game was going in and out with A&M this past weekend against Miami, right? And they have a couple guys in the secondary suspended for violating team rules, and then they get a couple guys in the secondary during the game ejected. And so I have to imagine, you look at that in a passing situation, I would think that changes the analytics to say, hey, you're more apt to go for something because they're obviously weak in the secondary in a passing situation.
For sure. Nothing. Things rarely go according to plan, and you got to be able to adjust and be able to figure it out. And like I said, and like we were talking about earlier, there's some games you go into it thinking, shoot, we're just going to have to win this game 52-48, and then you look up midway through the third quarter and it's 7-3, right. and then you've got to adjust to the situation.
We talked about 2-point conversions. I want to talk about the other big one, and that's sort of going for it on fourth down. Really, though, I think when people talk analytics, they say, okay, you need to know when you can go for it or when you can't. But personally, I think it's more important to know on third down, and really got to know it at the onset of the drive a lot of times. But in third down, give a scenario for those listen. But it's 3rd and 7, and that hey, if we can get in a 4th and 4 situation, we're going to go for it. So obviously now instead of calling a play to get all 7, you're calling something safe that can net you 3 yards. Is that accurate to think that starts happening a lot earlier than actually fourth down, right?
Yes, and the way that we do it, and once we get into and we'll talk about, okay, once we get past our own 40, we're thinking about going in for it. That'll be potential 4-down territory. And so say we get a first down on the minus 45 and the first down marker's on the plus 45 and the book says 4 or less. And so I'll go up on first down, right after we make the first down. Hey, coach, book says 4 or less. And then he'll pass it on to Garrett. Garrett knows. Then that same scenario, say we've got 3rd and 7. Sonny will remind him, hey, if you can get it 4 or less, then we're going to go for it. So that may change. We may run a fast screen. We may run a draw. We may run a slow screen, something like that, rather than trying to push it down the field to get all 7 yards.
Sure. How tempting is it for an aggressive coach? And I think, Coach Dykes has proven to be aggressive, and I think this is a big reason why. But how tempting is it for him and for you and your staff to have that aggressive mentality, regardless of what it says? So you can have that identity as a team, so your team knows, hey, we're always gonna play to win, kind of thing. Does that creep into your decision making?
That is the mentality we want to have. Like you said, like Coach Dykes is real aggressive with that stuff. Naturally, it works out really good. He's a little bit more aggressive. I'm a little bit more conservative. So we'll talk and kick that stuff around, when we're going through it, and just kind of present both sides of it. And then we almost always end up being more aggressive, which is good. Which I like it, and it's been good for us. But yeah, I do think it permeates through your team.
Sure. I think, Coach, and I may be a little biased. I've gotten to know you, but I think you're the perfect guy for this, because I think a lot of times, for quote unquote football people or football purists, they reject the analytics a lot of times because of the way it's presented. I think to me the onus is on the statistician or something to present it in a way in their terms, right? If you get to, I know you're a former math teacher, right? And so you probably have to be careful not to get too many pie graphs or whatever else you have. You can just say, hey, listen, this is bottom line it for the coach, right?
Yeah.
And so do you find that, as a former coach, that you're able to present it in a way that meet them where they are, sort of thing?
Sure, yeah. Well, and gosh, and like with Sonny, I mean, he's got a million things going on. He's managing the team, he's coaching the coaches, he's doing all that stuff, and so that's a big part of my job is to go through. And most of these are pretty cut and dried, but sometimes you'll get into a deal where, okay, if it's 4th and 3 or less, or 8 or more, we're going to go for it, or if it's between 4 and 7, we need to kick a field goal. And, and so you've kind of got to digest all that stuff down into a real quick, easy to comprehend bite in the heat of the moment with everything going on. Okay, here's what we got to do.
Right. Yeah. And you also, I'm sure it's fortunate to work with a coach who's going to, is more apt to receive that anyhow.
Oh,
right?
sure. Yeah. No doubt about it.
Yeah. Did you use analytics at all in terms of accepting penalties or not?
Yes. That's part of it as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What kind of data does that tell you in terms of to me, I have a hard time understanding how that would be presented, in terms of.
It's just as an easy example, offense has got the ball at first and 10. If they, let's make sure I'm explaining this right, they get an illegal formation penalty. So you can either make it 1st and 15 or 2nd and 9. You should take the 2nd and 9.
Okay.
It basically, the rule is if it's 2nd and 8 or more, you should decline the penalty.
I see.
If it's going to be 2nd and 8, if it's going to be less than 2nd and 8, you should take the penalty.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm going to put you on the spot then.
Okay.
I'm going to give you Peyton one. This may or may not have happened to me, and luckily we won the game. But this is this is something I thought about for a long time. Right. Mm-hmm. So you're you got the ball. It's under 2 minutes. You're in plus territory. Say around like plus 20. Okay. Mm-hmm. You're up by 4 points. Uh-huh. It's a 4th and inches situation. You have the ball, the 20. My thought, I'll just be honest with you, so I'll preface it by saying, okay, if this field goal gets blocked, I'm thinking, worst case scenario, and they take it back, the game's over, right? It's under 2 minutes. If we, it's 4th and inches, so we can put the game away right now. I think they had, maybe one timeout, if not none at all. So I knew they had a long way to go with maybe one or less timeouts. So, went for it in that situation. Didn't get it. Thank goodness our defense saved us at the time, and because it was obviously, right or wrong call. It was a wrong call because we didn't get it, right?
So, yeah, exactly.
And so I thought about that. It was in a big game, it was a playoff game, and I thought about that one. My goodness, it could have went the other way. Yeah. Something like that, is that the right call in that situation?
That's 100% a go.
All right.
Not even. I mean,
appreciate you telling
me. No
that.
hesitation at all. Yeah,
got it.
Yeah, you go because you've got a chance to win the game.
I see.
Right there. I mean, you got a chance. It's under your control. Right. You're going to convert that 72% of the time. And especially with a kicker, if you're on the 20, it's about to be a 37-yard field goal. That's about 76% of the time. And it doesn't seal the game. But if you make that, you seal the game. And you were thinking exactly right. Even if you don't get it, they're deep in their own territory. They've only got one timeout. They're going to have to drive down. They've still got to score a touchdown.
Right.
So, yeah, that was 100%.
I can sleep now, Coach.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. We talked a little bit about Colorado on the other side of the ball. We kind of flip it to TCU is possessing the ball. I think it was early in the fourth quarter. I think it was like 11:34 left on the clock. Mm-hmm. It's 4th and 3, I believe, and it's 17-6, so it's a plus 11 differential. Mm-hmm. And you guys go for it on your own. I believe it was the plus 23. So you have the plus 23. Mm-hmm. It's 4th and 3, and you're up by 11. You go for it in that situation. Yep. Does point differential matter?
Yes.
To that case? So if you were up, say, I know sometimes the differentiator is right at 17. Mm-hmm. If you're up 17 points, do you kick at that point, or is there something that changes it?
Yeah, in that situation, it was a very similar thought process with that. You kick a field goal there, you're up by 14, but that's still just a 2-score game. You convert, score a touchdown, which we did. Now we got it by 18. Now it's a 3-score game. Completely changes the complexion of the game.
Got it.
By that. There's tabs upon tabs in this book, and all of them are with different point differentials, and they tell you, okay, and gives you in that situation. And that was a 100% go. That was no hesitation.
And a lot of stuff, I'm sure, I'm doing this so long, and it's a lot goes into the prep work to know it ahead of time, so you can have those, like you said, have those quick conversations, give it to them in bullet points. But there are ever times where you just, if it's a really kind of unique, obscure situation where you're flipping through that book trying to find it at a time. I mean, I can imagine get a little crazy on the sideline.
It's funny. The book and most everything in the book is all done at the start of the drive and on first down, and then all the stuff that happens after that, then you're adjusting. But that's really more kind of you're just adjusting. Right. That's where you're pulling from. Coaches, a lot of years of experience. I got a lot of years of experience. We've been in a lot of situations, and just talking about, okay, hey, this could happen. We need to be ready for this. This could happen. We need to be ready for this. And just so you don't get caught unawares.
Oh, makes sense. And so for me, I know you and I talked about this before, and I'm a paper guy. Just that's the way my brain works. But I know a lot of people have gone to sort of an iPad where they can input sort of real time data, and that may change very slightly, but may change it. But you guys have stuck to the book. Why is that? What do you think for you?
We know some people, and we've studied some on the iPad and being able to do that, and being able to do that. And we've actually got one of the other guys on staff is taking an iPad, and we're kind of experimenting with that right now this year, just to see and to be able to do it. But I'm kind of like you. I'm paper. This is easy. It's simple. I can look, quick decision. You know what we need to do. And then you go from there. I'm a little bit concerned I'd get bogged down.
Sure.
By trying to do that, and paralysis by analysis, which you run into a lot. And you got to be careful because, like you said, you can really get lost in the weeds in this stuff in a hurry. And you've got to be able to boil it down because you've got to make quick split-second decisions and decide what to do. Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about how you do prep the team for this stuff, because as you just said, you can get paralyzed by this stuff and the amount of information. And so how do you present it to them in a concise way, but yet still building that confidence like we talked about earlier?
And what this championship analytics does, they send out different situations, different things that happen the week before in college football each week. And I'll go through that and just kind of pick and choose. Okay, hey, here's something we need to talk about. Here's something we need to talk about. And a lot of it with the team is just reminders. And one of the ones that got me a lot more fired up than I should have, but before at the Colorado game, when D returns the punt for a touchdown, and you watch, and we got Spivey and Curtis go shield off the guys in front, raise their hands up, get in front of them, cut it off so they don't get called for blocking the back. That kind of stuff. And we had actually shown them that exact thing the night before the game, just as a reminder of how you can't blindside anybody anymore. It's going to get called. Here's how you can make that block. And then our guys took that from looking at it on film and put it into play in the field and helped us get a touchdown.
Oh, that's great. We actually talked about that on Dissecting the Frogs here, that exact play on the punt return, and how we used to call it a hit by when they rip that arm through and literally throw their hit by and shield them. And it was a thing of beauty. You're right.
Yeah, almost a basketball screen and doing it. Yeah, and that was we had actually talked about that one, and then the Hail Mary at the end of the first half, we had popped up a Hail Mary on there. Reminded the guys, okay, offensive guys, here's what you need to do. Defensive guys, you got to bat it down. And then that one showed up too. So we had two of them that we actually talked to them about, and then they showed up in that very first game.
Do you, before you go into camp and you got all these, just a litany of situations to cover, is there a plan going into camp to say, okay, we're going to touch on, today we're going to do when to take a knee, when to, because I think a lot of times people don't understand, like, it's just taking a knee, no big deal. Well, you need to practice it. You need to practice everything, right? You need to practice how to line up for the national anthem. You need to practice. I mean, just everything needs to be rehearsed. But, how to do that compared to a delayed taking a knee. Sometimes that's, critical if the defense will allow it and the situation calls for it. How do you get all that stuff in camp? Talk to me a little bit about that planning process so the kid, the players can at least see it. So there's some recognition and recall. They're not going to remember all of it,
Right.
but there's some familiarity, so there's no panic that sets in.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll cover some of that stuff. We start covering some of that during spring training, and we'll go through it. And then in camp, but it's small, digestible bits. You do usually try and do one situation a day, and just kind of plug those in, so it's part of our DNA, part of who we are, that we cover those, and we'll hit those different situations. And then and then Coach Tomerdahl, like all special teams guys, has a script that he goes through, and it's great. It's really thorough and hits a bunch, because there's so many unique situations that occur in the kicking game.
Right.
I mean, you could talk about that, just the kicking game stuff, for hours.
Sure.
But he goes through that, and we just go through it and just hit those, and just to get the guys on the team thinking
Right.
about it.
Right, yeah. If a kick is blocked, if it goes across the line of scrimmage as opposed to behind it, and there's all the first touch rule and punt return. I mean, there's all kinds of things that it is super fascinating, especially in the kicking game. I know time is limited once you get into game weeks, right? The season gets in. How much are you able to incorporate that? Obviously, you can't do them all each week, but how often are you able to hit some of those things throughout the year, or does it just kind of, you guys shut it off after camp?
No, we keep going, and we'll go through some of them on Thursday, some of them on Friday during our lighter days. We'll go through all that, and we'll work extended take a knee, and we'll work a hang play, and we'll hit those every week, just to make sure. And then some of the special unique situations, those are the ones that we'll show them on Friday nights. And a lot of times, and guys are so smart, and so many people are visual learners. Just being able to see what happened somewhere else. Just as simple, and a great example of one that we show them that always comes into play is, and you'll probably remember this one, Larry Fitzgerald was the best of these. 2-minute situation, catches the ball, clock's running out, he gets it, runs the ball over, hands it to the official, so it can get placed, so it can get set down, so you save 2 or 3 seconds.
Absolutely.
Which, as we saw last year when the Cowboys were playing the 49ers, you don't do that simple thing, and that can make the difference between clock running out and not getting a chance to, spike it and have one more play.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, the end of game, that's always, there's so many situations in the end of game that come into play, whether it's, like you talked about Hail Mary earlier, and then it's defending the Hail Mary, and then there's different, obviously, in the field of play, there's different sections of the red zone where that philosophy changes on both sides of the ball completely. But how deep, I guess, going to go offensively, and I know, this is on the analytics, not necessarily on the, involved in the play calling necessarily, but do you talk about, hey, these are going to be like a last 4 plays? I know Bill Walsh was big on having, 4 plays that he said, you practice that you knew if you had no timeouts, you could just say last 4, and that would mean, 4 things in a row. I think things have become a little easier, Coach, now where it's not as complex anyhow in terms of play calling. You can get stuff done in one word, as opposed to that West Coast terminology back then. But is that stuff that you guys still implement now to have that in the bag for plays?
Yeah, we do. With just going back to as simple as knowing if there's 3 seconds on the clock, you can spike it. If there's only 2 seconds, you've got to go up. And we've got, if the ball's at midfield, we're going to run one play. If the ball's at the 20, we're going to run another. If it's the 12, we're going to run this. If it's the 3, we're going to run this, and being able to get it in so you can get that last play off, before the clock expires, and being able to do stuff like that.
Yeah. How much does it frustrate you to watch some of those games where these situations clearly weren't? I mean, great coaches, great players, big-time programs, and you see this stuff every week in across college football where it's neglected, honestly. I mean, at times. And sometimes people screw it up, or people cover that stuff and it still gets screwed up. Right.
So you just the biggest deal, you just try and watch it and learn from it, and that's what personally I've kind of evolved through that the last 10 years. If I'm watching a game on TV, I really, really pay attention. Last 3 or 4 minutes of the first half, last 3 or 4 minutes of the game. Not watching X's and O's and stuff like that as much anymore. Still like to watch it and do all that, but really paying attention to the game management, the clock management, those kind of decisions and things like that.
Right. You mentioned something. I'm just curious. Is there a analytic? In terms of analytics, is it much different from end of half to end of game? Does that change a lot in those? Let's just take offense, for instance, with the ball.
A little bit. A little bit, because obviously at the end of the game, it's over. if you don't convert, where, in a half, you still got to make sure, okay, we still got a half to play. Let's make sure we don't give them a chance to get something cheap right before halftime and give them momentum coming in, that kind of stuff. So there's a little bit of a change with it,
Gotcha.
From the aggressiveness standpoint.
Yeah, when I look at it, how much does, obviously if you're, the normal school of thought is if you're winning, you're going to be a little bit less aggressive. If you're losing, more aggressive, right? Pretty obvious. Right. Does that hold true in terms of the analytics, though, as well? Because I know, a lot of these things go against conventional wisdom. Is that true for him?
That's one of the biggest things that has changed and changed my point of view also, because forever it was what you growing up, and you're ahead. Make sure you get conservative, you do that, and they're very much a stay aggressive, continue to be aggressive, like we were talking about going forward on the 4th and inches. That is what this stuff is all built about, and keeping possession of the ball and keeping it away from the other team. And it will get a little bit more conservative, but they still stay pretty aggressive.
What is for you in your role? Obviously, we talked about as the director of player personnel, what that looks like, and the roster management. But as we into the season, in terms of the analytics, what is if you walk, we don't mind, as before we wrap things up here, just kind of walk me through a game week in terms of, hey, we're going to meet on this day about X, Y, and Z. Is that consistent from week to week, in terms of meetings on analytics? Yeah,
what we do is, like I said, Championship CAI sends us a list of situations and scenarios and things that happen. And I'll spend most of Wednesday afternoon going through that and pulling out, wow, this is pretty cool. We hadn't really talked about this as a staff. Let's talk about this. And then on Thursdays, we'll get together as a staff. We'll go through and here's things that'll be good to show the team. And then here's some coaching situations that came up that not necessarily going to talk about with the team, but we'll talk about together as a staff. Okay, hey, this happened to North Carolina last week. And here's the situation. What would we do? Right. And then we decide what we do. Then we'll come back and let it play out. Okay, here's what they decided to do. Here's how it worked out. Here's what the book recommends, the analytics recommend to do. And then we'll talk about it. And so we've got a better idea of how we, and that, once again, talk about building confidence, helps build a lot of confidence staff-wise too, because everybody knows, okay, hey, we've talked about this. This is what we said we were going to do. Here we go. Let's go do it.
Oh, that's fascinating. So Champion Analytics sends you each week sort of those type of plays that you can review from week to week as the year goes on. Oh, that's interesting. So does that change, do all those things, those different scenarios, as the year sort of evolves, does that change the numbers in the book?
Yes,
significantly, or
a little bit. And the other part that changes the numbers in the book, they've got 20 different points that they plug into an algorithm to help make the book out. And as you're going through the season, say we've been great on 4th and 3 or less, and we're playing somebody who's been awful at 4th and 3 or less. Well, this book's going to get a lot more aggressive that week because the numbers say going into it, we've got much better chance of success going against those guys. Same thing, if we're not doing very well on it and we're playing somebody who's great against it, it'll get a little bit more conservative.
Gotcha. Okay. And we talked about in-game if there's injuries, but leading up to that week, if the team's been great, let's just use a secondary example again, or let's just take something easy. So for 4th and short, all of a sudden they've been stout against that in that situation up, all year long, but they got something extreme, 2 interior defensive linemen out. Those numbers will change based on that?
Yep, they'll change in there.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. And then same thing like we were talking about earlier, if during the game, their top 2 interior defensive linemen get hurt and we're gashing them for 5 or 6 yards every time we run, and then that's just one of those, you just kind of have to make that adjustment during the game, but just realizing what's going on.
Nice. Now, if you can only take all this and let the fans know, when they make a decision, a lot more has gone into it than the guy in the 4th row, right? Having a hot dog. And,
no doubt. You know how it is. And
Sure.
if it works, it was a great decision. Right. If it doesn't work, then everybody thinks it was wrong.
That's right.
That's just part of it. But if you consistently make what should be the right decision and go back to like we talked about, it's just like playing blackjack. If you consistently, dealer's got 6, you got a 2, you consistently make him take a card, you're going to win more times than not. And that's what this really boils down to.
Well, it's fascinating, Coach. And I look, again, appreciate you returning to the show. And you've been in Frogs today and such a busy guy, and I appreciate you taking the time to join us. We could do this forever. And I may bother you again and bring you back and go more into it.
Yeah, no, I love stuff like this. It's a lot of fun. I was fortunate, I kind of got turned on to this early in my coaching career and had an older coach that kind of took me under his wing and taught me all this stuff. And I've always loved the game management part of it.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. I appreciate you joining us. For Coach Jeff Jordan, I'm David Beaudin with Dissecting the Frogs. Please join us next time.
Roxo Media House.